Good morning, Beaumont. Well, I'm here to ask you a very important question today. If a tree falls in the forest and no one is there to hear it, does it make any noise? That's the age-old question. It's meant to be thought-provoking, but it's mostly ridiculous because obviously the answer is unimportant. In times past, I've posed the question that if candidate A beats candidate B, but the media doesn't report it that way, does it matter? What if the news media chooses to say that candidate B won, even though it's obvious that he didn't? Does that matter? What if, for the first time in history, the media and the political establishment worked together to take over the government? What if they had a plan to put up a face, a figurehead, an iconoclast, in order to allow unelected, nameless, faceless people with a hidden agenda run the country? What if the people that were screaming democracy actually hated the very idea and were working in secret to override a democratic representative republic? If a man, let's say a president of the United States, led a group of people to commit treason against the very Constitution he swore to uphold, and that criminal action was brought to light beyond the shadow of a doubt, but the news media refused to report on it, did it really happen? Does it matter? If it does matter, then what should be done? The news media, for the most part, ABC, CBS, NBC, MSDNC, and Fox News, and not to mention PBS and NPR, have a contract with the American people. That FCC contract was written in 1934, and it specifies that first and foremost, they must operate in the best interest of the American people. Failure to do so may result in the revocation of their broadcast charter. David Shepperson of Reuters Media, for instance, a semi-literate journalist that relies on spell check to edit his articles. He wrote a screed on July 25, 2025, saying that President Trump wants to restructure the media. He said, and I quote directly, "Trump has repeatedly attacked broadcast networks for what he perceives as unbiased news." Well, I think what he meant to say was biased news, but since he is a leftist product of the public school system, David Shepperson thought it was unimportant because spell check fixes everything, right? What we know is that Reuters, as a news outlet, long ago got rid of real copy editors because spell check and AI can do it. But I digress. He meant to say Donald Trump is upset over the biased news, and he is calling on Carr over at the FCC to rescind their licenses. Donald Trump and, frankly, 80% of the American people are just fed up with the mainstream media. I cut the cord, so to speak, about 5 years ago. I don't have satellite. I don't have cable. I don't even have off-air HDTV because I got sick of the leftist propaganda and the poorly made product offerings. I now direct my own TV. I use multiple sources available on the internet. For example, Brandon Smith over at alt-marketus.us writes, "Probably one of the most fake news stories of the decade, the mainstream media relentlessly parroted the propaganda that the conservative protest at the Capitol building on January 6th was some kind of planned attempt at a national takeover, a violent coup resulting in multiple deaths." I was there. The reality is much less sexy. First, the FBI has been forced to admit there was no evidence supporting the claim that the protest was an organized coup. And when an institution that is extremely hostile to patriots admits this, you know the government has nothing. Not a single death originally attributed to the January 6 protesters was actually caused by them. So the tall tale that's been tossed down the memory hole, while there was evidence, while there was violence, while there was an unarmed protester who was shot and killed by the police, Ashley Babbitt, the result of the event was nothing close to what they call an insurrection. I was there. I can tell you that most of the people that were there were in their 60s and up. Most of them were military veterans, and they were of every color. They walked in, they milled around for a while. A couple of people may have picked up some souvenirs from inside, and then everyone left. Can you consider that a riot? Did anyone see BLM? BLM resulted in billions of dollars of property damage. Lots of people killed. The, quote, peaceful riots or peaceful protests were way different than what January 6th did. How about the Texas power grid failure? What a politically charged mess the coverage of this event was. Multiple people died in a freak winter storm that hit Texas, taking down parts of their independent power grid. And the first thing the lamestream media does is write hatchet stories about how this proves that Texas should never and could never secede from the Union. These people are obsessed with centralization to the point that they lose their minds if you generate your own electricity. Paul Krugman, who is a notorious spin doctor for the establishment, went on a tirade. In the New York Times, he dismissed any and all evidence that federally funded wind turbine failures led to the Texas power grid crisis. The facts on this are still buried to this day, but the numbers prove that Paul Krugman and the lamestream media were utterly wrong. The Mises Institute published a comprehensive article on this based on analysis from the Institute for Energy Research. The mainstream media and Paul Krugman argued the entire incident was caused by Texas' ill-prepared natural gas-powered grid and that wind turbines had nothing to do with it. By extension, the mainstream media asserted that this makes any notion that a state of Texas becoming an independent nation is laughable. It's important to note that Krugman offered no real stats to support his argument, and economists should have known better. But the truth is, the failing wind turbines were indeed the primary source of the power grid decline. Leading up to the winter storm in February, wind turbines were generating around 28%, a little less than one-third of Texas power. Natural gas was providing 43%. By the end of the freeze, however, the wind power had dropped to less than 6%, and natural gas took up the slack, increasing to 65% of the power provided. In other words, Krugman either lied or he was oblivious to the actual stats. While there were failures in the natural gas plants, the majority of the fault was the federally funded wind power. During the grid crisis, natural gas lost 7% of its overall output, while the federally funded wind turbines lost 47% of the output. That is the fact. I have driven by these wind turbine farms many times, and I've sometimes seen as many as one-third of the fans not turning. It's a bad idea. Wind power is stupid. It doesn't work when it's cold, and it doesn't work when the wind doesn't blow. So it's a really bad idea. What's another lie that the mainstream media may have told you? You got to get a vaccine if you want to live. Well, it seems today that the opposite is true, because not only is no one dying of COVID, but the mRNA in the vaccine is causing heart disease, blood clots, and turbo cancers. Every morning I get up and I pick up the paper and I see that some young actor or some young athlete has died, always from some sort of heart problem or turbo cancer. What is the common denominator? They all took the vaccine. My own brother died from the vaccine, from a heart attack and a stroke caused by the vaccine. And because state law where he died requires an autopsy if you die without a physician attending, he was going to get a free autopsy. Well, he was until they found out he was vaccinated. After that, they said, nope, no autopsies. If you want an autopsy, you're going to have to pay for it. It'll be $12,000. Well, my sister-in-law is barely hanging on at this point because she has no access to anything. So there was no autopsy, but we know what it would have shown. It seems that people who got vaccinated are actually getting COVID multiple times, whereas those who got COVID naturally, like myself, and then it went away, we have antibodies that prevent us from getting it again. Perhaps Dr. Fauci is the highest paid liar in recent history. He was the highest paid person in government service, but his lies go beyond simply acting as a propagandist for the government. The COVID pandemic luckily resulted in a very low average infection fatality rate. Only 0.27% officially died of COVID, meaning that 99.7% of the population had very little to worry about from the virus. The mild Omicron variant now in circulation, well, almost nobody dies from that. There are some fatalities, but not many. Despite the fact that the largest level 4 virology lab in Asia is in Wuhan, China, right down the street from the epicenter of the COVID outbreak, the lamestream media still fought tooth and nail to deny any connection. It was a murder investigation. It would be like the detective walking in the room, finding a dead body, and the neighbor standing over it with a bloody knife, and then buying the suspect ice cream and sending him on his merry way because He didn't witness him stabbing anybody. What about transitory stagflation? Mainstream media denied U.S. inflation. They said it had been commonplace for some time, but the truth is it hit 40-year highs and at one point was nearly 50%. Just recently, they tried to blame that on Trump until he put up the chart and they realized, holy crap, 80% of this happened under Biden. So, my theories on why this is the case, I wrote extensively on that issue in another article. Trump was a Russian spy, made up of whole cloth by people including Glenn P. Simpson of Fusion GPS, British spy Christopher Steele. Senior CIA officials looked at it and said, there's no way this is true. But the media ran away with it anyway, didn't they? They said Donald Trump will destroy democracy. Well, first of all, we have a constitutional representative republic. We don't have a democracy. Sadly, Democrats enjoy ignoring the rules. They seem to substitute their own. But a democracy is nothing more than mob rule. Might be a good way to choose whether to have vanilla or chocolate ice cream for dessert. But for anything else, it's simply two wolves and a sheep voting on what to have for dinner. They said Donald Trump would destroy the economy. Well, in his first term, the economy took off like a rocket. That's why they had to have COVID. They had to figure out a way to somehow stop him. But we enjoyed an entire generation of young people with the hoax that the only safe place is locked in your room. They said Donald Trump would cause World War III, but instead he signed more peace treaties than any president since Eisenhower. Barack Hussein Obama got the Nobel Peace Prize as soon as he was elected, and he didn't broker a single peace deal, despite giving billions to Iran. Donald Trump, on the other hand, got Iran to sign a peace deal with Israel just months after taking office and after giving them a little bit of our unneeded munitions. This, in addition to the other 5 peace deals he negotiated called the Abrahamic Accord and the African peace deal between Rwanda and Congo that had been going on for decades. Folks, it's way past time to jerk the licenses of the mainstream media. Remember OAN forced out of business, Alex Jones forced into bankruptcy because they were telling the truth. It is time for us to give the Joe Rogans, the Tim Pools, the Glenn Becks, the Alex Jones, and the Tucker Carlsons and David Franchi's of the world a shot at the nightly news. Maybe we get something a little more honest. So if a former president did commit treason and nobody reported it, did it really happen?
You have a choice, and you chose Freedom 1300.